Hey, it's me. Well, I'll be gone a few days, and I think it'll be good for me.
Stanley Black was no saint, but who amongst us is?
A lot different around here now. All the mines are dried up. A lot of people hurting.
Must be Stan's other boy, yeah?
I never thought he'd have the guts to do it.
20 years too late.
He's not the first to take his own life in recent times.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 255. Releasing in Australian cinemas on the 17th of October is Locusts, a crime thriller that tells the story of a prodigal son who returns to his Broken Hill home for the funeral of his estranged father, only to find himself ensnared in a blackmail plot involving his wayward brother. A gritty, thrilling and entertaining watch, Locusts also proves to be one of the better Aussie crime flicks to be released in some time. And I'm glad to say joining me today is the film's writer and producer, Angus Watts. Angus, thank you very much for joining me on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks for having me on. That was a nice intro. Return of the prodigal son, I like that. But yeah, no, it's great to chat, and I think that sums up the direction we're going pretty well.
Well, I want to talk about, before we delve into the film, just about yourself and your transition from, your day job is as a specialist radiologist by trade up where you are in the Gold Coast. Now you're writing and producing feature films. I'm just really curious about that transition. When was the transition made to kind of venture out into new territory?
Yeah, it's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it, between my day job as radiology. I'm a full-time practicing radiologist, and I've got my own interest there. I do discuss legal radiology and interventional radiology. I've been doing that for quite a long time, probably 15 years plus. But filmmaking is my lifelong passion. I've always been fascinated by film. I've always been a creative writer ever since I was about 7 years old. I've always loved the process of creative writing, and I grew up in the outback in a little town called Corindai, and I think I was sort of influenced in a way by my old man used to take us to the drive-in on Friday night. Sometimes we would go to this little sort of remote drive-in on the outskirts of Tamworth, and that was basically just a gaudy old poster board in the middle of a field, more or less, and we didn't even know it was on. There was no internet. There was not really any way of knowing what was on. So when I was sort of 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, we just wander down to the drive-in on a Friday night and just see whatever was playing. It'd be things like Jaws or Deliverance and, some of the greatest films ever made, in my opinion. So that's kind of where my main sort of influence sprung from. And I guess it's been a lifelong sort of fascination for me, genre film and the exploitation films of the 70s and 80s were very fascinating to me. And it really took me, I'm a late starter. I'm pushing 50 now, I'm afraid to admit, but it took me about 30 years to really pick up the pen and sort of write my first screenplay beyond there. But so I started screenwriting about 5 years ago, and I'm a self-taught screenwriter. I spent about a year really coaching myself in the dark art of screenwriting, and sort of went through, as all screenwriters do, went through a period of self-torture and a lot of angst is the journey of the screenwriter. Self-analysis and a bit of external harsh criticism and lots of rejection and all that sort of stuff. So I played that game for quite a few years, and I wrote a few screenplays. Locusts is my third screenplay, and I won a few awards for my first screenplay, which was a little crime drama. My second was a serial killer screenplay, which is kind of a bit of a speculator as a bigger budget production, and then Locusts, and then I've got another project in development, which is a smaller crime drama entitled Provisionally Jackals, which is kind of like a black comedy. It's a small thing that maybe I could direct one day. It's kind of my wish, but I was sort of fortunate enough to in my journey with Locusts, which I sort of spent about 4 or 5 years working on now. Coming out the tail end, I was lucky enough to do basically a bundle of this film with my 2 other projects, The Blacksmith and Jackals together with a French film sales agency. So they're quite excited about the second one, The Blacksmith, which is a bigger budget thing. So that's it's a conversation for another day. But I'm sort of excited in the background about where that might go. But obviously at the moment, my time and energy is really soaked up with Locusts, which has come a long way, and it's been very much a roller coaster journey for me, and an exciting one. So yeah.
Well, I mean, Locusts has come a long way. You've been working on it for years. It is very much your passion project. You wrote it, you produced it, you had hand in casting, you have hand in editing as well. I'm really curious though, when it comes to developing that story, the origins of that story, when you talked before about the movies that you watched when you were a kid at a drive-thru with your father, is this film in some type of way a tribute to those type of films?
Yeah, I think it is. It's something that I think when we're making the film is something that we were conscious of, and we set out to make the film as a modern noir western. And really what we wanted to do is pay some sort of subliminal or underhanded homage to some of those great films of the 70s and 80s. Because Heath and I, Heath was obviously a director, Heath Davis, and a very talented guy. And so Heath and I sort of collaborated for a few years on the film to develop it to the screen. We share a common passion for, the genre space. I think my taste is a little darker than his, and his taste is a little more comedy driven. But it's nice because we sort of found common ground, and I think comedy is something that's underdone in a lot of Australian films. I think comedy is important, it's kind of a nice medium to have a crime thriller with some little light comedic elements, perhaps, just to lighten it up a little bit, and some throwbacks, a little bit of homage to some of those sort of classic exploitation films of the 70s and 80s, which we thought was a nice little kind of hat tip, perhaps.
The title of the film is really interesting. The film is set, even though shot in Broken Hill. Broken Hill. The title, the location is fictional. It's a place called Serenity Crossing, and it's really interesting because it's a place that is poisoned in a sort of way. You have it's a mining town. It's closed down. Something happens there. Then you have on the other end drug dealers as well that are poisoning the townspeople as well. You yourself, you grew up in a small rural town in New South Wales in the 70s, like you said before. After that, you lived in Queensland, and there you really saw the economic impacts of both positive and negative that a mining boom can have on a town. Yeah. When did that start to kind of filter into this crime story that you were writing?
Yeah, I mean that's true. My day job as a radiologist, we have a private radiology business, and we're sort of mostly in Queensland. We have a presence in far north Queensland and central Queensland, and so just through our dealings over the last couple of decades, we've seen the mining boom really come from nothing to becoming the huge boom that it was in the late 2000s. And when everything was cranking pre-GFC. And then obviously the GFC came along, and then subsequently the mining boom sort of decayed. And so we saw firsthand really some of those communities really go from being very quiet communities to just being gangbusters commercially, lots of jobs, lots of people, fly in, fly out, lots of workers, very much the height of the mining boom. And then the boom dried up for a while, and obviously there's a lot of mining activity now, but we saw a very relatively abrupt transition from this boom period in North Queensland to a much more sedate period. So, firsthand, we were sharing, at one point, flights, going to our radiology practice, we were sharing flights with miners, wearing vests, and as they do, and booking extra flights for the miners. And now, of course, we're beyond that point, that all pretty much settled back into the background. All the fly-out workers were gone, and the money dried up, at least for a time, and so on. So this story is kind of an extrapolation of that idea of the boom-bust impact of the mining boom, really on small communities. And this story is about a small fictional town, a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, that the mining boom's come, and there's been jobs for everyone and lots of money, and then the mines have dried up and everyone's left, and now there's all that's left is unemployment and drugs and desperation in those left behind. So it's kind of, the story is kind of extrapolation of reality, and it's kind of just a creative vision that I had. But and there's some other themes in there, like fracking is a subject that we touch on in the film, and so yeah, there's a few environmental elements in there as well.
You mentioned the name before, Heath Davis. He's a director of Locusts. He's quickly becoming one of my favourite Aussie directors. I had him on the podcast last year to talk about Book Week. I'm just really curious, how does a radiologist from Gold Coast in Queensland get in touch with a filmmaker from the Blue Mountains here in New South Wales?
The world is shrinking. Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I guess we kind of converged, our pathways converged, and that was that he had done a film called Broke in 2016, which was a great film. I love Broke, and it did quite well. I was doing the festival circuit. At that point, I'd written a couple of screenplays, and I was at a point where I was thinking I really want to progress things, particularly with Locusts. And I went to the Gold Coast Film Festival, and Heath was doing the talk circuit with Broke. So I had a chat with him. We got together and had some beers, and I had seen Broke, and I was pretty impressed by it. It was obviously a small production in many ways, but visually and aesthetically, it looked to me like $1 million film, and it was well short of that. But you know, that impressed me, and his vision, his vision as a filmmaker impressed me, and also his approach to filmmaking. And you know, he'd done the hard yards as a filmmaker, and I thought that was interesting to me. So we started a conversation about his filmmaking journey, and then, you know, conversely my own journey as a writer and someone who was pretty highly motivated to get this film done, and he was into it, and we talked about it, and we talked about the concept of making a modern Western, and we sort of connected over our common love for genre films, and so we began a process and a conversation, I guess, that went on for a couple of years, and developing that concept, and I spent a lot of that period doing other activities like location scouting, and I spent a lot of time looking around Australia for locations. I'm a very visual person, and I had the vision for this story was very clear in my mind. The film was just playing in my head. I guess every screenwriter must have that. The film just plays in your head day and night, non-stop, ad nauseum. But you know, I knew exactly what it was going to look like, and so I went to different places. I went to Winton and Cooper Pedy, and obviously Broken Hill, just scouting and talking to people, and looking at everything from landscapes to, you know, house locations and vehicles and things like that. And in the end, we decided on Broken Hill, and that was really for logistical reasons, because you know, because there's a domestic airport, and you know, you fly in, fly out of Sydney and Adelaide, which is quite nice. But with a medium-sized film crew, and in the end, we probably had perhaps 100 cast and crew on Locusts. So this is a much bigger production than Book Week, which was his previous film, which I was actually an executive producer on. And so it was a big step up for him in terms of size and scale and cast and budget and you know, locations and many different ways. But that was good, you know, like you need to challenge yourself in life, and I think everybody was challenged in different ways on this film, and that was kind of, you know, that was kind of part of the for me, part of the satisfaction of making this film was to get not only experienced heads, and we had many experienced cast members and people behind the scenes like Rick Beecroft, who was first AD on Wolf Creek, and Tiare Tomazuski, who was our line producer, who's, you know, she's worked on everything from Hacksaw Ridge to The Reef and many larger projects. So we had some experienced heads, and, you know, many of the cast members like Steve Lamarquand and Justin Rosniak and so on, who'd done, you know, more films than you can count, but we also had people who were coming into their own and getting runs on the board, getting experience. And to me, that's exciting. It's exciting to have, rising talent and give them the opportunity to get in there and give it a shot and give it their best shot. And, we had a young art department led by Carlo Cressini, who is a young bloke from Sydney, and he's extremely talented. He worked on Little Monsters and a few other things, but he was excited. This is probably, I think, perhaps the biggest project he'd done. And he had a fun young team, all keen to get their hands dirty and get stuck in there in the middle of the desert, digging holes, all that sort of stuff that art crews do. And look across the board. There was a mix of sort of a nice balance of experience and youth and exuberance, I guess.
You have a great cast in this movie. I want to touch on particularly your lead players, Ben Gurens and Jessica McNamee. Both of these actors, they work primarily in Los Angeles now, and there's no doubt the strength of your screenplay brought them back to Australia to work on your movie. The process of getting in touch with them and getting your screenplay in their hands, what was that like? And just to follow up on that as well, when it comes to working on an independent film like this, how important is it to get names like that on your film in regards to securing distribution, for example, or even a bigger budget than what would initially be in the first stages of putting your film together?
Yeah, look, that's it's a good few questions. I might start by answering the last one of those questions, and really that's the $20 million question. How important is it as an independent film or any film to have a name attached to it? And really, it's very, very important as far as the distributors go. I've taken this film around the world. I took it to the Cannes March to Film, and talked to every major distributor, and of course the first question is, who's your big star? And where's Lee? He's not on this film. Where's Johnny Depp? Blah blah blah. So they all want the big name because they can sell it easily, and that's kind of unfortunately the nature of the business. Because I guess from a sales point of view, it's very much a fast visual sort of thing. But as a creative independent filmmaker, it was more, from our point of view, it was more about having the independence to do things the way you wanted to do it and cast with the right people in the right roles, rather than just bring a person up front because they've got a particular name that can bring a particular budget. So to answer the last question, it's very important to get a name. Did we have a massive name? Not really. Did I care? Not really. We always wanted to do this film independently, and so I guess look, in terms of the actual distribution and distribution and sales, it's all about the big star, the big name star. But as independent filmmakers, we're quite ferociously independent. The way and just to answer your other questions, Ben and Jessica, both very talented actors and doing some great stuff in LA. They're both working and living in LA. Ben's really underrated, and I'd like to see Ben go on to do some much bigger projects. He's a very passionate guy, incredibly committed and talented guy. This was a difficult shoot. We did a 28-day shoot, and he was on set pretty much every day, and we were shooting some long days, 12-hour days, and it was difficult. We shot in the middle of winter. Often it was kind of -4 degrees at night, and everyone was sort of rugged up with beanies and fur and woolen jackets. But he obviously was on set just doing his thing, and I don't think I ever heard him complain. So he really is a passionate guy and was very committed to doing this film, and very. I think he was really into the character, this kind of Jimmy Stewart type character who's sort of a stranger in a strange land. Ben was very, he did a wonderful job, and he's doing some great stuff in the US. Jessica's a great talent, and she is doing Mortal Kombat, I think, next year, the new Mortal Kombat film. She did The Meg a couple of years ago with Jason Statham. So she's got a few credits, but yeah, that's right. I mean, those guys sort of made the decision to come out and make an independent film in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and so yeah, it was wonderful to have them attached. It was difficult casting the lead because I guess we were unknown, so we spent a lot of time trying to cast that lead role, and particularly with the right person. We had a lot of people came on board early. Andy McPhee read the script once and came back, I think, the next day, basically, and said, "I'm in." And we had a lot of quite experienced cast members, supporting cast members, come on pretty early. But casting the lead was difficult. But then he was fantastic, and he was 100% the right. He was 100% perfect for that role. So, yeah.
I absolutely love the casting decisions made in regards to the villains in your movie. Steve Len McQuad, the great Alan Dukes. Who else is there? Justin Rosniak's in there. The late great Damien Hill as well in his last performance on screen. Getting all these guys together to play kind of like your really kind of your grotty, violent, unpredictable villains. I mean, that must have been a blast to have all those guys in the one group together playing these really despicable characters.
I think those guys enjoyed it more than anybody else, because some of those guys had never played a bad guy before, particularly guys like Alan Dukes, who is, he's sort of the central bad guy in this film, and he's fantastic. He's an amazing talent. He starred in Book Week before Locusts, and I met Alan on the set of Book Week, and I knew straight away. I was like, I know exactly the role for you, and he's got a theatrical. He's a stage actor, and he's classically trained, and I guess perhaps he comes from a slightly different background, and anyway, he brought everything to the film, and a lot of his own creativity and wonderful talent. Yeah, that's right. Of course, Damien Hill, unfortunately, very tragically, it was his final role. Damien lost his life a couple of months after the film, and it was very upsetting for all of us on the film. And I personally got to be quite good friends with Damien on the film set. We would sit down at Broken Hill and talk about our sort of each of our own journeys as independent filmmakers, because he was not only a great actor, but a writer and a producer. And and so, yeah, look, it is very sad for all of us. But from his point of view, I think he was excited to do something different. He'd never played a bad guy on screen before, so I think he was quite excited for that opportunity to do something a little bit different. And of course, yeah, as you say, Steve Lamarquand, who's played, I guess, just about every kind of role you can think of. Great talent and an incredibly funny guy, Steve. Justin Rosniak, of course, he's been around forever, and he said to me, "You don't cast Justin Rosniak, you unleash him." So that was kind of appropriate for a bad guy role for him. Yeah, that's right. So we basically had these sort of 4 or 5 guys. And there's a young guy, Ryan Morgan, who plays one of the bad guys as well. And he's got a key sort of pivotal role. And that's his first feature role. And I spent a bit of time casting that role and looking around. And Ryan is just an amazing talent. Hopefully we'll see more of him as well. It was great having him on board. But yeah, so it was a big cast, and there was a lot of opinions, in production. But that's okay. That was good, and it's good to have all that. I guess all those opinions and attitudes, and everyone's got a voice on the film. It was always important. In a character-driven genre film, for everybody to have a voice, and everyone knew that when they turned up, and they sort of embraced it. So hopefully you can see that on screen.
We talked before about Broken Hill, about how you found it to be a perfect place logistically wise, and I think I like to think that also yourself as a big movie fan, you're working. You're on your first film at the place where Mad Max, Waking Fright, Razorback, all these hallowed Australian productions were made at that place. You're walking on that ground and you're making your movie as well. I'm sure that must have been just a great experience for you.
it's kind of hallowed ground. It was very surreal, really, and as I mentioned, Heath and myself are both big fans of all that stuff, all those films you mentioned, all the classic Aussie films of the 70s and 80s, and when you're at Broken Hill, it's kind of like a museum of cinematic history. Everywhere you go, there's stuff from Priscilla or Mad Max or Razorback, and literally everywhere you go, you just be talking to a random guy in the pub, and talking about filmmaking, or say, I was an extra in Wake and Fright, I sat at the bar over there, or I worked on a lorry on Razorback, or I was in the art department on Mad Max 2 or whatever. Like everybody's been involved in the film industry in some capacity, which is great, because obviously as a film crew, you want all the help you can get, and there's plenty of support there in town for it, for us as a production team. There's a guy called Jason King, who I'd like to mention, that he runs Screen Broken Hill, and he's basically the town film liaison go-to man, and a director and a writer in his own right, a very talented guy. And so he was integral to the production, and him and I are good friends, and hopefully we'll collaborate on something in the future. But every production that turns up in Broken Hill, he's the go-to man, and Broken Hill is a unique sort of microcosm. The land around town is all owned by station owners, and so as a filmmaker, you really need to get permission from the station owners to use their land, etc. Of course, and Jason knows them all. So of course, as a filmmaker, Jason's the go-to man, and so we're very much relying on his local knowledge to get things done in town, and he was very much a key part of our production.
So 5 years working on this movie. It's out in a couple of weeks. You mentioned before you have other films in the pipeline. You talked about The Blacksmith and The Legacy. You touched on those movies. Now that you've had your experience, you've had your hands dirty, you got your feet wet, what do you take from working on Locusts to your next production? And also, just talking to you and hearing your enthusiasm about film and how you approach film in a visual aspect as well as a writer's aspect, is any thoughts about directing maybe as well in the future?
Yeah, look, I have to say, directing is probably the next step for me. I think I have sort of been intimately involved in every area of the process on this film, from writing, right through to production, and I supervise post-production. I work very closely on that edit with Scott Gray, who's sort of the unsung hero behind the scenes on this film. So Scott Gray's, he's been nominated for a couple of ACTRA awards for his editing skills, and incredibly talented guy, and it was really a privilege having him on the film, and alongside Romain Mongan, who's our sort of anchor editor. But Scott was sort of our senior editor, and I worked very closely with Scott really to refine the film, and so as a writer, working in the edit with Scott was really probably the most valuable experience I took away from the whole process, because I guess perhaps not many people get to go through the writing process and the editing process, and they're very, very closely tied together. And so I think my writing, writing is what is my first and foremost interest. So I think my writing is probably benefited from really being involved in the edit. It's really a very key part of the whole process. So, so what's next for me? I think I'll probably write and direct something next, if my wife will let me. Sitting here looking at me going, "You're crazy," which is probably fairly true. But, directing is probably the next challenge for me. But my philosophy in life is that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. It's just another step on the road. But this time it'll be different for me, because Locusts is very much a 5-year process in many ways, a one-man band. Outside the production sphere, getting it up and getting it out there and whatever. But obviously next time it would be different. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to trying my hand at direction. I think it'd be a fun experience.
So for everyone out there listening, Locusts, 17th of October in Australian cinemas. You can check out locustfilm.com, and also there's a great Facebook page for Locust Film as well for all information. Angus Watts, I thank you very much for joining me today, and also congratulations with the movie as well. I've seen the movie, I love the movie. Like I said in my intro, it's one of the better Aussie crime movies I've seen in some time, and I've seen quite a bit of them over the last year. So I'm going to say congratulations to you again, and hopefully we can talk again in the future when it comes to your other projects as well.
Yeah, cool, Matthew. Thanks very much for having me on, and great chatting. Much appreciated.